What should we expect from New York Ranger defensemen Ryan Lindgren, Miller, and Erik Gustafsson this season? We debate this and more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 875 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so, going to continue our fun-filled off-season series. You know, the everydayers will be familiar with this format, this concept. Basically, every off-season, we take a look at every single player that I believe will be on the New York Ranger opening night roster. We go through the worst-case scenario for every player, as well as the best-case scenario for every player. In our most recent episode, we covered the two goalies, obviously Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick. And today, going to focus in on the left defenseman. So let's go ahead, dive right into it, and start with the individual who I believe will be on the top pairing at left defense, and that is, of course, Ryan Lindgren. It's a position he's held for the last handful of seasons here, and somebody that's really the heart and soul of this team. We're going to start with the worst-case scenarios and then make our way to the best-case scenarios. Always good to end, on the good stuff, the positive stuff, always be glass half full here on Locked On New York Rangers. But as far as a worst-case scenario for Ryan Lindgren, I think one thing you can point to is injuries. And I do think there's times where Lindgren's injuries have been a little bit overstated. I got some numbers that I think will back that up in just a second here. As far as the idea of him being injured in a worst-case scenario, for the most part, I'm not going to mention injuries, best case and worst-case scenario, because obviously worst-case scenario is they get hurt, best-case scenario is they stay healthy. But with Ryan Lindgren, I think it's a little bit different because he obviously is coming off of an injury last year. But there's a decent amount of people that I think have kind of labeled Ryan Lindgren as like this, not extremely, but at least somewhat injury-prone player, and I just don't know that it's true. And I get where the concern comes from. Once again, he had an injury last year, had to miss some time, obviously plays a very physical style out there. He's always bleeding all over the ice. We know that. He leads the NHL in blood spilled, his own more so than his opponents. Just a tough-as-nails player. But as far as like him being injury-prone, let's go through the seasons since he made his New York Ranger debut and find out how true this really is. So we'll go back to 2018, 2019. He only played 5 games with the Rangers this season, played 65 games with the Hartford Wolfpack, but didn't seem to miss any time that year. 2019, 2020, played 60 games with the Rangers and 9 with the Hartford Wolfpack. So between the two teams, played 69 games of pro hockey that season. The Rangers that year, though, only played 70 games. That was the year that the pandemic happened, shut everything down, and the last portion of the NHL regular season was canceled. And then you had that, 2014 playoff tournament in the bubble. But that season, again, Ryan Lindgren not missing any time, again, playing in 69 games of pro hockey. Rangers only played 70 games in the regular season that year. So go ahead to 2020, 2021. Lindgren, by this point, permanent fixture on the New York Rangers. There's no more Hartford Wolfpack for Lindgren at this point. And only 56 games that year for the regular season for the NHL. Once again, COVID being the cause of that. But Ryan Lindgren, out of the 56 games, played in 51 of them. And the only 5 games that he missed were the final 5 games of the regular season. And at that point, playoffs were basically just a pipe dream for the Rangers. I mean, I want to say they were still like mathematically alive at that point, but it was one of those deals. They would have had to go like 5-0. Some other team would have had to go like 0-4-1 for them to get in. So it pretty much wasn't going to happen. And Ryan Lindgren missing games that were largely meaningless at the end of the season, only missed 5 games out of a possible 56. Then we go ahead to 2021, 2022. Back to 82 games in the regular season for the Rangers and every hockey team in the league. And Ryan Lindgren played in 78 of them. And he also played then in 17 out of 20 playoff games. That was the year, of course, that the Rangers went to the conference finals. So again, 78 out of 82 for somebody that is supposedly injury prone. That's not too shabby at all. And then that brings us to this past year. And yeah, he had an injury, obviously caused him to miss some time, ends up playing in only 63 of the 82 regular season games, played in all 7 playoff games as well. But this is really, since he's been playing pro hockey, this is the first time that Ryan Lindgren has had an injury that caused him to miss any sort of significant time. And yes, he did miss a decent chunk of the season, but, he was there when they needed him, obviously got healthy in time for the playoffs and everything. And I'm just not there yet. I'm just not there where I'm going to label Ryan Lindgren an injury-prone player when, once again, in 5 seasons here, he's had one injury that caused him to miss any sort of significant time at all. Now, obviously, if he has another injury this year, and knock on wood, we hope that doesn't happen, obviously from a New York Ranger hockey perspective, but also just from a personal perspective, we don't want to see Ryan Lindgren get hurt. Then at that point, maybe there's a conversation to be had. But right now, I'm just not ready to go that far that he's, this injury-prone player. I would think also in a worst case scenario, you could get to a situation where Ryan Lindgren, probably not this year, but maybe going into the offseason next year, or maybe this year. I mean, I guess you never know what's going to happen. But at one point or another, he becomes kind of the odd man out when it comes to this group of defensemen. Once again, he's going to be involved with the Rangers this year. He's going to be right out there in a top 4 role like he always is. But going into next offseason, Ryan Lindgren is a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. And this is something that we talked about a little bit when we did our episode on the Rangers signing K'Andre Miller to an extension. The Rangers right now, when you look at their defensemen and what all of them are paying and what their contracts look like and what the future looks like, they are paying $9.5 million a season to Adam Fox, $8 million a season to Jacob Trouba. We're now up to $3.872 million for Miller, and he'll be an RFA just 2 years from now. Brian Schneider, not making any money now, but he will be when he's an RFA going into next season. Zach Jones and Matthew Robertson still in the mix. And not everybody that I just mentioned is going to be a Ranger for life or be a Ranger for the rest of their career. At some point, one of these guys or two of these guys are going to move on. And I just wonder, Ryan Lindgren, and I don't want this to happen because I'm a huge fan. I think he's the heart and soul of this team. But I do wonder, at a certain point, does he become the odd man out? Does he become the guy that's just a little bit too expensive? And, man, we got to clear some cap space here to do this and do that. It's at least possible. And my fingers are crossed that does not happen. But, just looking at the lay of the land right now, I can see a scenario where that could play out that way. And it's possible Lindgren gets traded. And again, knock on wood, hope that does not happen. Best case scenarios for Ryan Lindgren. I would say in a best case, Lindgren maintains his spot on the top pairing with Adam Fox. That's where he's been, in recent Ranger history, the last 3 seasons. There's not any real reason to break them up. The two of them are very good friends. They were roommates at one point. I'm not sure if they still are, but they were roommates. They're very close or said to be very close. And I think they just click out there together. I think they complement each other very well with the style of hockey that they play. You've got Adam Fox, which is the dynamic all-around defenseman, brings all the offensive fireworks. You've got Ryan Lindgren, a little bit more of a stay-at-home defenseman and kind of an old-school type. But they click, man. They just make it work. And, I'm all for the two of them staying together. I am open to the idea, and this is something else that we talked about in the K'Andre Miller re-signs episode. I am open to the idea of maybe trying Miller and Fox together at some point, and then that's your top pairing, and then Ryan Lindgren slides down to the second pairing. I just feel like Lindgren, it's one of those situations, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Lindgren and Fox obviously work very well together. And I think Miller and Trouba, the same can be said for the two of them as well. But I guess in a worst case scenario, or in a best case scenario, rather, Lindgren does maintain his spot there with Adam Fox. I think he just very much benefits from playing with his close friend there. Obviously, the two of them are very tight. And like I said, I think their styles complement each other very well. Also, in a best case scenario, Lindgren basically just remains a go-to defenseman, somebody that you want on the ice late in games. He's somebody that obviously had the trust of Gerard Gallant when he was here. I would imagine the same will probably be true of Peter Laviolette. I mean, you look at Ryan Lindgren and you know what you know about Peter Laviolette. It just feels like the two of them would click right away. That would be a Peter Laviolette type of defenseman there. But I'm always interested to see, whoever the coach might be, late in games, down or up by a goal, trying to protect, a 1-goal lead. Who are your go-to guys? Who do you want on the ice in that situation? And we've seen Ryan Lindgren out there, honestly, even going back to David Quinn, when Ryan Lindgren was first starting to get going. And I can remember there was a game early in Lindgren's tenure with the Rangers. He was up from Hartford. And Sam and Joe, pointed that out. And they said, how about this? Going with Ryan Lindgren late in the game with the Rangers trying to protect a 1-goal lead. He's always been very trusted by each of the 2 preceding New York Ranger coaches. And I would imagine the same would be true for Peter Laviolette as well. You'd go to Ryan Lindgren in a spot where you're trying to protect a 1-goal lead with, 30 seconds left, a minute left, minute 30 left, whatever the situation might be. Just one of those guys that you trust and you lean on and you go to in a spot such as that. I think also in a best case scenario, we see Ryan Lindgren playing some big time playoff hockey for the New York Rangers. Obviously, this is a team that's kind of in win now mode. And, the rebuild is long over. I think it ended as soon as the Rangers were going to the Eastern Conference Final a couple of years ago. But Ryan Lindgren is somebody whose skill set should translate very well to the playoffs. Obviously, tough defenseman to play against, very physical, and that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to Stanley Cup playoff hockey. This year in the playoffs, I didn't think Ryan Lindgren really stood out all that much. He had that one pretty sick goal. I think it was in game 1. It's either game 1 or game 2, going to the net and scoring from a tough angle. But yeah, Lindgren, like a lot of Rangers in the playoffs, just I don't think was at his absolute best. There were guys that stood out a lot more in a negative way than Ryan Lindgren, believe me there. And you guys know that just as well as I do. But yeah, I think in a best case scenario, Ryan Lindgren is one of the guys leading the charge and setting a tone for the Rangers if and when they get to the playoffs this upcoming season. I'm going to say also in a best case scenario for Ryan Lindgren, how about a new career high in hits? For Lindgren's career, he has 400 hits in 257 games. The most he had in a season was in 2021-2022. He played in 78 games, had 129 hits. I think he can beat that. I think he will beat that. I feel like, once again, he's going to be empowered playing for Peter Laviolette. He just seems like a Laviolette-type defenseman, and he's got to throw his weight around perhaps more so than we've ever seen, and that would be saying something because Lindgren goes out there and plays physical every single night. I think also in a best-case scenario for Ryan Lindgren, why not another Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award? He won one this past season. It was his first one. Stephen McDonald's son was there to present the award, and he referred to Ryan Lindgren in the same way that I think a lot of us all do, the heart and soul of the New York Rangers. I felt that when Stephen McDonald's son went up there and said that. That was awesome. It's voted on by the fans, this award, and to me, that kind of makes it that much more impressive that Ryan Lindgren won it because again, it's the Extra Effort Award, so you're looking for that guy that just goes out there and gives it his all and leaves everything on the ice and, works hard. But, the Rangers, they're a team, they got a lot of star players on their team. They got a lot of guys that have been there for a long time. You would think the fans might gravitate to somebody like, Kreider or Mika Zibanejad or Artemi Panarin or Igor Shesterkin or Adam Fox. And I think everybody I just mentioned, they would have been fine choices to win that award, but nobody, I think, was more deserving than Ryan Lindgren. And I think as long as he's here on this team, he's somebody that will be in the running for that award every single season. It's a cool award. It's a great thing. And Ryan Lindgren, a very worthy recipient of it this past season. We'll see if he can win it again this year or sometime in the future. Got to keep everything rolling in just a second here, though. Really excited to see what Ryan Lindgren can do this season. He's somebody that I don't think has as wide of a range of outcomes as some other players in the Rangers because he's one of those guys, what you see is what you get with Ryan Lindgren. But I'm very much looking forward to it. Somebody that is one of my absolute favorite players on this team. That is for sure. Keep everything rolling, though, in just a second. I want to turn our attention to K'Andre Miller, fresh off of his extension, and we'll get to that in just a minute here. But first, got to let everybody know, today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it literally every day. I gave it a shot because I wanted a supplement that actually tastes great. I'm not a big fan of pills, and I just wanted to see what all the hype was about. And I'm glad I did. I started taking it about 15 months ago. I drink it every morning, and it just gets me ready for the day. Everything that I got going on that day. I played baseball yesterday. I'm in a Sunday league. Drank that before I went to my baseball game. Drank it before I recorded Locked On Rangers here today on Monday morning. And like I said, it just keeps me focused, keeps me energized pretty much throughout the entire day. And AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health. AG1 replaces your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple drinking habit. AG1 helps you build your health foundation first, and AG1 is raising the standard for quality in the supplement category. All great athletes have one thing in common: they take care of their bodies. And a huge part of that starts with optimizing whole body health. A lot of them also drink AG1, which is part of the reason why I'm a huge fan as well. With every daily serving, I'm setting myself up for success with 75 high-quality ingredients that give me key daily nutrients and support energy, focus, strength, and clarity. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out. All right, we just want to go ahead and thank everybody, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, definitely stick around throughout this week. We are down to just 3 episodes per week for a short time here in the off season, but I'm really looking forward to our next one. We're going to be talking with Locked On Nashville Predators. I want to go ahead. We already talked to Locked On Caps. I want to go ahead and just kind of get a feel for Peter Laviolette as much as we can and talk about what went right, what went wrong during Laviolette's tenure with pretty much every other team that he's ever coached. We're going to move on to the Nashville Predators in our next episode, do some general hockey talk with Nashville Predators as well. Really looking forward to that. But for right now, let's go ahead, continue what we're doing here, and talk about K'Andre Miller, once again, fresh off of his 2-year extension worth $3.872 million per season. As we always do this, we'll start with the worst case scenario for K'Andre Miller. One little critique that I've had of Miller, and I say this as a big Miller fan, I think it's one of these draft picks that the Rangers clearly hit on. And, Miller right now is a great player, but he's got upside to be even better. But I think in a worst case scenario, there have been times where he's been on the ice and it feels like opposing players, opposing forwards are able to get just a little bit too comfortable in the Ranger crease. He'll be there, but he doesn't really body them, just doesn't make it difficult enough for them to kind of maintain their position there. And I realize you can't get away with the things you used to be able to get away with if somebody was like in or near your crease. I mean, it used to be a war zone in there, and you could basically just cross-check people in the back and completely get away with it. But you can do something. I mean, you can knock them off balance a little bit. You can jostle for position. And I would just like to see a little bit more of that from K'Andre Miller. I mean, he does play physical. He does rack up some hits. But in that specific situation, I just don't know that he's, especially for as big as he is and as strong as he is, I don't know that he's creating enough resistance in those situations. Opposing players seem like they're able to set up in front of the Ranger net somewhat easily, even when Miller is nearby and on the ice in general. So that's a worst case scenario that becomes or continues to be a little bit of an Achilles heel for K'Andre Miller. I think also in a worst case scenario, we see K'Andre Miller get off to another slow start this season. Some players, it's not even just in hockey, it's really in any sport. Some players are just kind of slow starters. I don't know that I'm ready to yet call that a trend for K'Andre Miller, because really the only time we saw it was this past season. His rookie season, I thought he got off to a great start, which he needed to do in order to solidify his roster spot. But this past year, him and Jacob Trouba, they were struggling. They were struggling at the beginning of this past season. It just felt like every time they were on the ice, they were giving up a goal, or at the very least, a golden scoring opportunity. Now, we found out eventually that Jacob Trouba was trying to play through some tough injuries, and obviously that slowed Trouba down. Maybe by proxy, it slowed down Miller a little bit and caused him to struggle. But I don't know. Miller, regardless of what was going on with Jacob Trouba, Miller just got off to a rough start this past season. The Rangers started last year 2-0, and Miller was a +5 in those 2 games. But from the 3rd game through the 25th game, K'Andre Miller was a -10 during that stretch. And I know plus minus isn't everything, but I do think in this case, it was kind of indicative of the way it was going for K'Andre Miller as well as Jacob Trouba. And, just early in the season, some turnovers for Miller, just some hesitant play. He, along with most of this Ranger team, just looked a little bit slow, a little bit, I don't know, just unfocused or whatever the case was. We know that stretch that I'm talking about last year where the Rangers were just really scuffling. Gallant wasn't too far away from potentially being fired in season. They eventually turned it around and got it going. K'Andre Miller eventually turned it around and got it going. And again, I do think part of the reason for the struggles for the Trouba-Miller pairing were the injuries to Trouba. Miller clearly was not at his best in the early portions of last season. So I think in a worst case, once again, maybe a little bit of a slow start for K'Andre Miller this upcoming season. Best case scenario, there's not too much for worst case. I think K'Andre Miller is somebody who's, star is on the rise, and clearly he's trending upward. And if he never gets any better than he is right now, he's still a rock solid NHL defenseman, but I think he's got more to give. I think in a best case scenario, though, K'Andre Miller plays in 82 of 82 games. This is something else that I talked about in our recent episode where K'Andre Miller got his contract extension. He's been an extremely durable defenseman. Obviously, he's young, so he's got that working for him as far as, staying on the ice, but very durable. The last 2 seasons combined, K'Andre Miller has played in 188 out of a possible 191 games. It would be all 191 if not for the fact that he was suspended for 3 games this past season. But when you combine the 2 regular seasons from these past 2 seasons and the 2 postseason runs from these past 2 seasons, you put everything together, 188 out of 191 games played for K'Andre Miller. And again, it would have been all 191 had it not been for the suspension. I think also in a best case scenario, we could see K'Andre Miller claim a spot on at least one of the 2 power play units. I wouldn't completely rule out, it's a little bit of a long shot, but I would not completely rule out Miller being on the top unit. Depends how Laviolette wants to roll. I think a lot of power plays, you see them with, especially top power play units, you'll have 4 forwards out there and only 1 defenseman. And if I had to take a stab at it right now, I would say that's probably how the Rangers would roll. You have Adam Fox and then, 4 forwards out there. But, would they consider a situation where you go with a top unit of, say, you got Miller and Fox on the ice together, and then you go Mika, Kreider, Panarin? Could that be the top power play unit? I think it's at least possible. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility. I think more likely, though, we end up seeing K'Andre Miller on the Rangers' second power play unit. I hope he's out there for at least one of them because he's got more offense to give, more than a half point per game defenseman this past season, and that's with, limited time on the power play. But I think we could see a second power play unit of Miller, Kakko, Hedel, Wheeler, and Trouba. And in that scenario, Vincent Trocheck would be on the top power play unit with everybody that I already mentioned. So I think that's definitely possible. There's competition. I mean, look, Trouba can play on the power play as well. Erik Gustafsson, who we're going to talk about in a minute here, he can play on the power play. So the Rangers have a lot of options, and it's interesting to know that they have at least 4 defensemen, 5 if you count Zach Jones, that you can put in there on the power play and feel pretty good about it. But I do hope the Rangers make some room for K'Andre Miller, at least give him a chance to stake his claim to a spot on one of the 2 power play units. I hope he gets his chance this upcoming season. I think also in a best case scenario, we see K'Andre Miller just take a big time jump where he's becoming, basically a superstar in the NHL. I thought we were honestly witnessing it in real time 2 years ago in the playoffs when the Rangers made their run to the Eastern Conference Final. Thought Miller had a great postseason run for himself there. Was a big part of the Rangers doing what they did. And a play that he made in that playoff run that gets so overlooked and just isn't talked about that much was Game 7 against the Penguins in overtime. Now, you think about that, you immediately think about the Artemi Panarin game-winning goal, and rightfully so. That's an iconic goal, and it's not a moment that I or probably any of you will ever forget. But how did that get set up? How did the Rangers get on the power play in the first place there? Well, that was K'Andre Miller making an outstanding defensive play. The Penguins had just gained the Ranger blue line, but they didn't have a lot of room to operate with, and, space is tight there. Miller pokes the puck away into the neutral zone. The race is on. The puck's just sitting there. Miller picks it up along the boards, drives his way to the net, is maybe going to score the game-winning goal, and he gets hooked. And that was what caused the power play. That was all K'Andre Miller. Outstanding defensive play, great hustle to get to the puck, just exploding up the ice, driving hard to the net, not going to be denied. And he draws the penalty that set up the game-winning goal for Artemi Panarin. And if that doesn't happen, who's to say what happens ultimately in that game? Maybe the Rangers win it anyway, but maybe they don't, and that's obviously a huge play by K'Andre Miller there. Just one example of, him making a big-time play in the postseason there. But, yeah, again, I think, what we were seeing 2 years ago, that was K'Andre Miller at his absolute best. And, he was a little bit up and down this past year, but overall another strong season, and somebody that I do think has that kind of upside where he could be a superstar and a bona fide, top pair defenseman in this league. To keep everything rolling here as far as, best case scenario for K'Andre Miller, to kind of build on what we just said here, I would say in a best case, K'Andre Miller, you could be talking about him as one of the best success stories as far as New York Ranger draft picks are concerned in a very long time. We're going to exclude goalies here because obviously getting Igor Shesterkin in the 4th round, that's going to be tough to top. If you want to go way back, we could talk about getting Henrik Lundqvist in the 7th round. But think about the drafts that the Rangers have had in recent years. It's easy to, look at and kind of fixate on the big time swings and misses like Kravtsov and Elias Anderson. And I get that. Nils Lundqvist, I mean, he could still be a good player, but obviously the Rangers didn't have a spot for him. They ended up having to trade him. So, Kreider obviously is a success story as well, but that was more than 10 years ago at this point. Think about recent Ranger drafts. K'Andre Miller could be the best player that the Rangers drafted in any of the recent drafts, unless I'm just forgetting somebody in, say, the past 10 years or so. Now, look, obviously, Kakko, Alexis Lafreniere, Philip Hedel, those guys could eventually, really find their game and really become the players that we expected them to be. But as things stand right now, you look at, Ranger success stories in the draft, K'Andre Miller's right up there. And again, we have to exclude Igor Shesterkin to put him in conversation because I don't think anybody can really top Igor Shesterkin and his importance to the team. But yeah, I mean, K'Andre Miller is right there in terms of Ranger success stories coming out of the NHL draft. And again, Miller, I'm very bullish on him. I think he's got superstar potential, top pair potential written all over him. We'll see how it shakes out, but he's another player that, I'm really looking forward to just seeing what he can do this upcoming season. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We're going to take a look at the player who I believe will be the Ranger 3rd pair left defenseman. That would, of course, be Erik Gustafsson, and we will do that in just a second. All right, so let's go ahead, talk a little about Erik Gustafsson, who, again, I believe will, on opening night, probably line up there alongside Braden Schneider to make up the Rangers' third pairing. We just did a crossover episode last week with Jack Bushman of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it. Jack does a phenomenal job with his show just in general, but it was great to be able to talk to him a little bit about Erik Gustafsson as well as Patrick Kane and what the future holds for Kane. But with Gustafsson, he's a player that isn't necessarily a household name, and Jack just gave us some great intel on Gustafsson and what he brings to the table, and going to use some of that info we got from Jack to kind of go through here, because I haven't, watched a ton of Erik Gustafsson over the years. He's always on a different team, and again, just not somebody that has ever really jumped off the page in any meaningful way. I mean, he's a little bit of an offensive defenseman. We know that, but to go through the worst and best case scenarios here, I think in a worst case scenario, he plays a little bit hesitant, obviously on a new team, although he should be used to that at this point. He bounces from team to team every season. But talking to Jack, it sounds like there were times during Gustafsson's 2 tenures with the Chicago Blackhawks where Gustafsson would kind of get caught in between a little bit and just wouldn't trust his instincts, wasn't sure whether to jump into the play or hang back a little bit, and would get caught in no man's land, would lead to an odd man rush for the opposing team. So I guess in a worst case scenario, he plays a little bit hesitant, plays with a little bit of a lack of confidence. Gustafsson has had a really strange career path. Again, total journeyman, played for a million teams, very up and down, had to settle for a PTO a couple seasons ago with the Islanders, didn't even make their team, went back to Chicago, but then became, a really good player for the Washington Capitals under Peter Laviolette. And we're going to get to that in just a little bit as well, him being reunited with Laviolette. But yeah, I think in a worst case scenario, he just, again, doesn't trust his instincts, plays a little bit hesitant, the way Jack Bushman was describing that for us when we did our crossover episode. I think also in a worst case scenario, we see Gustafsson be a little bit of a defensive liability. This one's pretty self-explanatory. He is somebody that's known for being a little bit more of an offensive defenseman. But like a lot of number 6 defensemen, we from Erik Gustafsson just kind of don't want him to be a reason why the team loses games. We don't want to see him be a liability. We don't want to see him turning the puck over left and right, giving away chances for the opposing team. We just need steady, mistake-free hockey from Erik Gustafsson. Kind of the way that we got it from, I would say, Ben Harper this past season. Now, Ben Harper, obviously not a superstar or anything like that, but there's a reason why he was able to stick in the lineup, and Zach Jones and Libor Hayek just were not. Just steady, consistent, unspectacular, but also the kind of hockey where you're just not making mistakes and you're not putting your team in a bad situation. If we can get that from Erik Gustafsson, then I think he'll do just fine and probably stick as the Ranger 6 defenseman. But he is just kind of the latest member of this, revolving door, this party of NHL defensemen that is, been in the Ranger 6 defenseman role for the past handful of seasons. I mean, we've gone from Nemeth to Hayek to Jones to Lundqvist to Braun to Mikkola and now to Gustafsson. And I get the feeling this might be a short stay for Gustafsson as well. I get the feeling maybe he's only signed to a 1-year deal. Maybe he'll walk in free agency after the season. And at that point, the Rangers will be more comfortable turning it over to, Robertson, maybe Ty Emberson. He's played well in the AHL. Zach Jones is still in the mix for now as well. So we'll see what happens. But it's just kind of an interesting situation, the way that defensemen have really kind of come and gone as far as the Rangers 6 defenseman spot is concerned. Best case scenario for Erik Gustafsson. I'm going to start with the coach. I'm going to say Peter Laviolette in a best case scenario, once again, gets the absolute best out of Erik Gustafsson. Now, for reference, Gustafsson last year, the first half of last season, I mean, more than half, but you know what I mean, played for Peter Laviolette with the Washington Capitals. Gustafsson played in 61 games with the Caps, and then he played in 9 games with the Toronto Maple Leafs after being traded to Toronto. So Gustafsson, in 61 games with the Caps, had 7 goals. That was the second most of his career and the most since 2018-2019. He had 35 assists total last season. 31 of them were with the Caps. 4 of them were with the Leafs after he was traded there. But that mark, the 35 overall assists, the vast majority of which came with the Capitals, that was tied for the second most of Gustafsson's career. He was also a +9 overall, +9 with the Caps, and then even with the Leafs. But that +9 for Gustafsson tied for the second best of his career and the best since he was a +11 as a rookie in Chicago. And while with the Capitals, Gustafsson averaged 20 minutes, 22 seconds of ice time. That was the third most of his career. Also had 57 block shots and 51 hits while with the Washington Capitals. So this is somebody that went from, again, just a season before this, having to sign a PTO with the Islanders and not making their team, going back to Chicago, going to Washington, D.C., and finding his game under Peter Laviolette. So I'd like to think that Peter Laviolette is somebody that can get the most out of Erik Gustafsson. We'll see how it goes this upcoming season. I think also in a best case scenario, Gustafsson just clicks with Braden Schneider. It might not happen right away. Obviously, defensemen have to kind of get a feel for each other out there. I think this past season when Mikkola first came over, the two of them kind of struggled initially. The first 3 or 4 games, they were struggling to get on the same page. I think they eventually found it and got a feel for each other. Braden Schneider, we mentioned all the Ranger defensemen that have come and gone. He's had to play with all of them. Braden Schneider's only been in the league for about a season and a half, and he's had like 6 or 7 different defense partners at this point. He's getting another one here in Erik Gustafsson. But, you just hope that the two of these players can obviously click, find some rhythm together, find some chemistry together, and basically be what I would call a junior version of Adam Fox and Ryan Lindgren. You've got, kind of the dynamic offensive playmaker in Fox. You've got the same thing in Erik Gustafsson. And then you've got kind of the old school, gritty, hard-hitting defenseman in Lindgren, and then also in Braden Schneider. And obviously, I'm not expecting Gustafsson to be Adam Fox, but you know what I'm saying here. It's kind of a similar dynamic where you have kind of an offensive guy and then kind of an old school defensive, gritty defenseman as well. So if we can get Gustafsson and Schneider to basically be, like I said, a junior version of Fox and Lindgren, then I think we're all going to be feeling pretty darn good about our third pairing here. I think also in a best case scenario, Erik Gustafsson stakes his claim to a power play spot. Now, we said the same thing with K'Andre Miller, but I think the competition should be on, the battle should be on as far as, who earns spots on the Ranger 2 power play units. And I think in a best case scenario for Gustafsson, I can't see them putting him on the top power play unit, but maybe the second power play unit is in play for Erik Gustafsson. He has, in his career, Gustafsson, 191 points. 6 of his 39 goals have come on the power play, but none since 2019-2020, and 49 of his 103 assists, so basically half, have also come on the power play, and that included 14 total between the Caps and Leafs this past season. 11 of those assists were with the Washington Capitals. So Laviolette will use him on the power play. My understanding is there was an injury to Carlson for a while. I do remember him missing some time last year, and that kind of opened the door a little bit for Gustafsson to have a bigger role in general, but also on the power play. And so that might be part of what led to him having, a high assist total while he was with the Caps under Peter Laviolette. But somebody that I think should at least be an option, at least get the opportunity to compete for a job on one of the power play units. That's something we'll keep an eye on rather in the preseason training camp, the whole 9 yards. So definitely looking forward to that. I figure we could pretty much call it there for today, but in our next episode, like I said, we're going to have that crossover with Locked On Predators. Going to be talking a little bit about Peter Laviolette, his stay there, the trip to the Stanley Cup final, everything that went on with Peter Laviolette in Nashville. It's also a good time to remind everybody to send me your Derek Stepan stories, what you were doing, who you were with, how you reacted when Derek Stepan scored in overtime against the Washington Capitals in Game 7. And fantasy hockey, if you played last year, I've heard back from a bunch of you guys. Definitely write me, either DM me on Twitter or send me an email. Not the YouTube comment section. That's going to be hard to keep track of. Try to either email me or DM me on Twitter to kind of reclaim your spot for this year. And if you didn't play last year, do the same thing and we'll save your place in line if we have some openings for the league this season. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, there's lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, there's at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.